The millionaire panics over a failure in his $100 million jet until a poor 7-year-old girl fixes the problem in 1 minute and leaves him pale. Before we dive into this emotional story of sadness and loneliness, drop your location and subscribe for more inspiring stories. The deafening alarm pierced through the luxury hangar as smoke billowed from the $100 million private jet's engine compartment. Robert Sterling, the 45-year-old tech mogul worth over $3 billion, stood frozen in absolute terror as his prized Gulfstream G650, his escape from tomorrow's crucial board meeting, threatened to explode before his very eyes. "Sir, we need to evacuate immediately," shouted his lead mechanic, Frank Morrison, as sparks flew from the aircraft's sophisticated navigation system. The smell of burning circuits filled the pristine hangar, and Robert's hands trembled uncontrollably. This wasn't just any jet malfunction. This was his lifeline, his sanctuary, the one place where he could escape the crushing loneliness that had consumed his life since learning he could never have children of his own. "No, no, no!" Robert screamed, his usual composed demeanor cracking like fragile glass. "That jet cost me more than most people see in 10 lifetimes. There has to be something we can do." His designer suit was already damp with perspiration, and his perfectly styled silver hair was disheveled from running his hands through it frantically. The mechanics had been working for 3 hours straight, their expensive diagnostic equipment scattered across the hangar floor like defeated soldiers. Every wire had been checked, every circuit tested, every possible solution attempted. The jet's computer system had crashed completely, displaying nothing but error codes that made no sense to even the most experienced aviation technicians. As Robert paced back and forth like a caged animal, his expensive Italian leather shoes echoing against the polished concrete floor, he caught sight of a small figure in the corner of the hangar. 7-year-old Emma Rodriguez sat quietly on an overturned bucket, her worn sneakers barely touching the ground, watching the chaos unfold with curious brown eyes that seemed far too wise for her young age. Emma was the daughter of Maria Rodriguez, the night janitor who had been quietly cleaning Sterling Industries facilities for the past 2 years. While her mother worked tirelessly to make ends meet, Emma often accompanied her during school breaks, armed with coloring books and a fierce intelligence that constantly surprised the adults around her. The child wore a faded purple dress that had been carefully mended multiple times, and her dark hair was pulled back in 2 neat braids that her mother had woven that morning before their long bus ride to the industrial complex. Despite their modest circumstances, Maria always ensured Emma looked presentable and dignified, instilling in her daughter a sense of pride that transcended their financial limitations. "What are you staring at, kid?" Robert snapped, his frustration boiling over as another mechanic emerged from the jet shaking his head in defeat. "This is no place for children." His voice echoed through the cavernous hangar, causing several workers to look up from their futile attempts at repairs. Emma didn't flinch at his harsh tone. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, studying him with the same intense focus she had been directing at the malfunctioning aircraft. There was something unsettling about being observed so intently by someone so young, as if she could see through all his carefully constructed facades straight to the frightened, desperate man beneath. The irony wasn't lost on Robert that he, who commanded boardrooms full of Harvard graduates and intimidated competitors worth hundreds of millions, was being quietly assessed by a 7-year-old girl in a mended dress. Something about her steady gaze made him feel exposed in a way that no hostile takeover or media scandal ever had. Emma stood up slowly, her small frame dwarfed by the massive aircraft behind her, but her voice carried a confidence that made everyone in the hangar pause. "Mister, I think I know what's wrong with your airplane," she said simply, her childish lisp making the words even more surprising to the adults who had spent hours failing to solve the problem. Robert's face turned red with indignation. "Listen here, little girl. This is $100 million piece of machinery, not some toy that—" He stopped mid-sentence as Emma walked directly to the jet's open access panel, stood on her tiptoes, and pointed to a specific area that the mechanics had somehow overlooked. "See that blue wire there? It's not connected to the right place. My daddy taught me about electronics before he went to heaven. He said blue wires always talk to the smart part of machines, and yours is trying to talk to the wrong friend." Emma's explanation was delivered with the matter-of-fact tone that only children possess, making complex technical issues sound like playground logic. Frank Morrison, the head mechanic with 30 years of aviation experience, looked where Emma was pointing, and his jaw dropped. There, barely visible behind a mass of other cables, was indeed a critical connection that had somehow worked loose during routine maintenance. It was such a simple fix, yet its location made it nearly impossible to spot without knowing exactly where to look. "How in the world did she—" Frank began. But Emma was already climbing onto a maintenance ladder with the fearless determination that adults had long forgotten. Her small hands gripped the metal rungs with surprising strength, and she moved with the natural confidence of someone who had spent countless hours watching her father work on various mechanical projects before his untimely death. "Emma, get down from there right now!" Maria Rodriguez's voice echoed through the hangar as she rushed over, her cleaning supplies clattering to the floor. She had been working in the adjacent office building when she heard the commotion, and the sight of her daughter climbing around expensive aircraft equipment sent panic shooting through her chest. "I'm so sorry. Mr. Sterling, she shouldn't be bothering you and your important business." But Robert was transfixed, watching this tiny girl handle the sophisticated aircraft components with a natural understanding that defied logic. Emma's small fingers worked with surprising precision as she reconnected the wayward wire, her tongue peeking out slightly in concentration, completely oblivious to the fact that she was being watched by some of the most powerful and wealthy people in the state. The hangar had fallen completely silent, except for the sound of Emma's careful movements and the distant hum of machinery from other parts of the facility. Even the mechanics had stopped their frantic troubleshooting to watch this unprecedented scene unfold. Robert found himself holding his breath, torn between skepticism and a growing sense that he was witnessing something extraordinary. "There," Emma announced proudly, climbing down from the ladder and dusting off her small hands on her dress. "Try it now. But first, I need to ask you something very important, Mr. Airplane Man." Her expression had shifted from mechanical focus to something more vulnerable, the look of a child about to make a request she wasn't sure would be granted. Robert's hands shook as he signaled for Frank to test the systems. The mechanic's fingers flew across the diagnostic equipment, and within seconds, every warning light disappeared. The jet's engines hummed to life with their familiar, powerful purr, and all the navigation systems came online perfectly. The impossible had happened. A 7-year-old girl had solved in 1 minute what his team of experts couldn't fix in 3 hours. This is absolutely impossible," Robert whispered, staring at Emma as if she were some kind of miracle. "How did you know to do that? How did you see what none of us could see?" His voice was barely audible over the sound of the now-functioning engines, and for the first time in decades, Robert Sterling found himself completely at a loss for words. Emma shifted from foot to foot, suddenly shy now that all the adults were staring at her with expressions of amazement and disbelief. "My daddy was really smart with fixing things. Before the bad sickness took him away, he taught me that machines are just like people. Sometimes they get confused and need someone to help them remember how to talk to each other right." The simplicity of her explanation made the miracle seem even more profound. Robert had surrounded himself with complexity his entire life, complicated business deals, sophisticated technology, intricate financial instruments. Yet this child had cut through all of that to find a solution that was elegant in its simplicity. The hangar fell completely silent, except for the gentle humming of the now functioning jet. Robert felt something crack deep inside his chest, a wall he had built around his heart after years of failed fertility treatments, failed relationships, and the crushing realization that he would never be a father. The doctors had been clear. His condition was irreversible, his dreams of biological children impossible. "You said you needed to ask me something important," Robert said, his voice softer now, almost gentle. He knelt down to Emma's eye level, something he had never done with any child in his entire life. The concrete floor was cold and hard against his knees, but something about this moment demanded that he meet her as an equal rather than towering over her. Emma took a deep breath, her small hands clasped behind her back, in the way children do when they're about to ask for something they're not sure they'll receive. "Well, there's this thing at my school next week. It's called Bring Your Daddy to School Day. And all the kids are supposed to bring their daddies to show what they do for work and stuff." Robert's throat tightened as he began to understand where this conversation was heading. He could see the loneliness in Emma's eyes, the same isolation that had haunted his own childhood when his workaholic parents had been too busy building their empire to attend school functions or show interest in his achievements. "I don't have a daddy anymore," Emma continued, her voice growing smaller with each word. "Mommy works really hard, but she can't come because she has to work during the day to pay for our apartment. And I thought maybe since I fixed your airplane and saved you lots of money, maybe you could pretend to be my daddy, just for one day, just so I don't have to sit alone again while all the other kids show off their daddies." The request hit Robert like a physical blow, stirring emotions he had spent years trying to suppress. The vulnerability in Emma's voice, the careful way she had constructed her proposal to emphasize the mutual benefit, the heartbreaking acceptance of her own loneliness. It all combined to create a moment that would forever divide Robert's life into before and after. The request hit Robert like a physical blow. He stood up abruptly, pacing away from Emma as his mind raced through 1,000 complications and impossibilities. Pretend to be someone's father. The very idea was absurd, completely outside anything he had ever considered. He was Robert Sterling, ruthless businessman, confirmed bachelor, someone who had built walls so high around his heart that even he had forgotten what genuine human connection felt like. "Sweetheart, that's a very big thing to ask," Robert said, his voice strained as he struggled to process what had just happened. "I don't know anything about children or schools or—" He gestured helplessly at Emma, this tiny person who had just performed what seemed like magic on his most prized possession, then asked for something that terrified him more than any hostile takeover or financial crisis. Maria Rodriguez stepped forward, her face flushed with embarrassment and panic. "Emma, mijo, you can't ask such things from important people. Mr. Sterling has very important business to do. He doesn't have time for school visits and little girl problems." Her voice carried the weight of a woman who had learned to expect disappointment, who had taught herself not to hope for miracles because they rarely came for people like them. But Emma's eyes remained fixed on Robert, with the kind of hopeful determination that only children possess. The unwavering belief that adults could fix anything if they really wanted to. "I don't need you to be good at daddy things," she said earnestly, her small voice carrying a wisdom that seemed impossible for someone so young. "I just need you to stand next to me so the other kids stop saying mean things about how I don't have anybody who loves me enough to come see me at school." Those words cut through Robert's defenses, like a laser through paper. He saw himself in Emma's loneliness, the isolation, the feeling of being fundamentally different from everyone else, the ache of watching others have what seemed impossible for him to attain. His own childhood had been marked by empty seats at school plays, missed birthday parties, and the constant message that business was more important than relationships. Robert ran his hands through his hair, a habit he'd developed during particularly stressful board meetings. The perfectly styled silver strands fell across his forehead, making him look younger and more vulnerable than he had in years. "Emma, what you did here today, what you did to my jet, that was incredible. You have a gift, a real talent that could take you places most people only dream of." Emma's face lit up with pride at his words, but her expression quickly became serious again, the look of a child who had learned that praise often came with conditions or limitations. "Does that mean you'll come to my school? Because I have another idea. A bigger idea that might help both of us." "What do you mean?" "Bigger?" Robert asked, though something in his gut already knew he wasn't going to like where this conversation was heading. The way Emma's eyes sparkled with mischief and determination reminded him of himself during his most audacious business negotiations. The moments when he had proposed deals so bold that even he wasn't sure they would work. Emma took a step closer to him, her small hand reaching out to touch his expensive watch with careful fingers, as if she were assessing its value and quality with the same precision she had applied to his aircraft. "If you come to my school and pretend to be my daddy for the whole day, I'll help you fix other things too. I see lots of broken things in this place, and I bet I could fix them all. But if you really want me to help you with everything—" She paused dramatically. The way children do when they're about to propose something they know is outrageous. "Go on," Robert said, despite himself, feeling like he was being drawn into a negotiation unlike any he had ever experienced. Emma's next words would change everything. "If you really mean it about me being special and having gifts, then don't just pretend to be my daddy for one day. Make it real. Adopt me for real, and I'll fix anything that's broken in your whole life." The words hung in the air like a challenge, and Robert felt his world tilt on its axis. Adopt her. This child he had met 15 minutes ago was proposing to completely restructure his entire existence. The logical part of his brain screamed that this was insane, that children didn't make business propositions, that successful billionaires didn't make life-altering decisions based on aviation miracles performed by 7-year-olds. But as he looked at Emma, really looked at her, he saw something that made his chest tight with emotions he couldn't name. This wasn't just any child making a desperate plea. This was someone who had inherited her father's brilliant mind, who possessed an innate understanding of complex systems, who had just demonstrated problem-solving abilities that surpassed his entire team of engineers. "Emma, adoption it's not something people decide in a few minutes," Robert said carefully, his business training kicking in even as his heart hammered against his ribs. "It's permanent. It means forever. It means I would be responsible for you. And you would be stuck with me even when I'm difficult or working too much or don't know how to be what you need." The vulnerability in his voice surprised him. Robert Sterling, who had never shown weakness in a boardroom, was essentially confessing his deepest fears to a 7-year-old girl. The fear that he was fundamentally unsuited for love, that his workaholic nature and emotional distance would damage anyone who got too close. Maria Rodriguez's eyes were wide with shock, her cleaning supplies still scattered on the floor where she had dropped them. "Mr. Sterling, please don't feel obligated because she fixed your airplane. Emma doesn't understand what she's asking. She's just a little girl who misses having a father figure." Her voice trembled with the effort of trying to protect both her daughter from disappointment and this powerful man from making a decision he might regret. But Emma stepped forward again, her small chin raised with determination that reminded Robert of himself during his most crucial business negotiations. "I understand more than you think, Mommy. Mr. Airplane Man needs someone who can fix things that are broken. And I need someone who can give me chances to learn and grow up smart, like Daddy wanted." The strategic thinking behind Emma's proposal was breathtaking. She had identified a mutual need, positioned herself as the solution to Robert's problems while acknowledging her own requirements, and presented the arrangement as a partnership rather than charity. It was the kind of thinking that had made Robert billions. Yet here it was, emerging from a child who had learned it not in business school, but from watching her parents navigate survival with dignity and intelligence. Robert knelt down again, studying Emma's face with the same intensity he used when analyzing potential investments. What he saw there wasn't childish whimsy or desperate manipulation. It was clarity, purpose, and an emotional intelligence that seemed impossible for someone so young. "If I said yes, And I'm not saying I'm saying yes, but if I did, what would you expect from me? What does being a real daddy mean to someone like you? Robert asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Emma's face became thoughtful, as if she had been preparing for this question her entire life. A real daddy teaches you things, helps you when you're scared, comes to school things, and doesn't leave even when life gets hard. A real daddy believes you can do anything and helps you figure out how to do it right. The simplicity of Emma's answer hit Robert harder than any complex business proposal ever had. This child wasn't asking for wealth or luxury or any of the things his money could easily provide. She was asking for presence, for commitment, for the kind of steady, reliable love that he had never experienced himself as a child, and had convinced himself he was incapable of giving. "And what about your mother?" Robert asked, glancing at Maria, who looked like she might faint from the surreal nature of this conversation. The question carried weight beyond its simple phrasing. He was asking about logistics, about family structures, about how a billionaire bachelor could suddenly become responsible for two people whose lives were so different from his own. Emma reached over and took her mother's calloused hand in her small one, her expression becoming fiercely protective. "Mommy comes too. Of course. She's the best mommy in the whole world, and she works so hard that sometimes she cries when she thinks I'm sleeping. If you adopt me, you have to take care of her too, because we're a team." The loyalty in Emma's voice, the way she instinctively included her mother in any arrangement for her own betterment, spoke to a character that had been forged by hardship but hadn't been hardened by it. Robert realized he was looking at someone who understood family in a way he never had, not as a burden or obligation, but as a source of strength and mutual support. Maria's eyes filled with tears as she looked between her daughter and this powerful man who seemed to be seriously considering an offer that sounded like something from a fairy tale. "Emma, mijo, we can't ask Mr. Sterling to take care of both of us. That's too much to ask of anyone." But Robert was studying Emma with growing fascination. This child had just demonstrated the kind of strategic thinking that had made him billions. She had identified what everyone needed, found a way to provide value to all parties, and structured a proposal that addressed every stakeholder's interests. More than that, she had done it with an emotional intelligence that recognized love as the foundation of any successful family business. "Let me understand this correctly," Robert said slowly, his analytical mind working through the implications, even as his heart raced with possibilities he had never dared imagine. "You're proposing that I adopt you, which would mean your mother becomes part of my family as well, and in exchange, you'll use your abilities to help solve problems in my business and my life?" Emma nodded solemnly, her expression serious beyond her years. "And you'll come to all my school things, help me with homework, and teach me about business stuff so I can be smart like you when I grow up. And maybe sometimes we can just watch movies and eat popcorn like real families do." The vulnerability in those last words nearly undid Robert completely. This brilliant, extraordinary child wasn't just offering her services as some kind of mechanical prodigy. She was offering him something he had given up hope of ever having. A real family, built not on biology or traditional expectations, but on mutual need, respect, and the possibility of genuine love. Robert stood up and walked to the window overlooking the runway, his mind racing through implications, legal requirements, the complete upheaval this would mean for his carefully controlled life. Behind him, he could hear Emma whispering to her mother in rapid Spanish, and Maria's soft responses filled with shock and cautious hope. When he turned back around, Emma was watching him with patient expectation, as if she somehow knew that this moment would determine not just her future, but his as well. The late afternoon sun streaming through the hangar windows created a halo effect around her small figure, making her look almost ethereal. "If I agree to this," Robert said finally, his voice thick with emotions he was still trying to understand, "everything changes for all of us. There's no going back once we start down this path. Are you sure this is what you want?" "Really sure," Emma smiled for the first time since he'd met her, a radiant expression that transformed her entire face and filled the sterile hangar with warmth. "The best things happen when people aren't scared to fix what's broken, Mr. Airplane Man. And I think we're all a little broken, but maybe we can fix each other." Robert Sterling, the man who had built an empire on calculated risks and strategic decisions, realized he was about to make the most important choice of his life based entirely on the wisdom of a 7-year-old girl who had just offered to heal his broken world. 3 weeks later, Robert Sterling stood in the marble foyer of his $40 million mansion, watching Emma Rodriguez spin in circles on the imported Italian marble floor, her new school dress twirling around her like a princess gown. The transformation had been swift and overwhelming. Legal papers rushed through with the efficiency that only unlimited money could buy. Media statements carefully crafted to present the adoption as a philanthropic gesture and a complete restructuring of his life that left him breathless with uncertainty and something that felt dangerously close to hope. "Daddy Robert, look. The floor makes my dress fly like I'm dancing on clouds." Emma's laughter echoed through the cavernous space. A sound so pure and joyful that it made Robert's chest ache with emotions he was still learning to name. The word "daddy" had taken some getting used to. She had started with it naturally after the papers were signed, as if the legal formality had simply made official what her heart had already decided during those first moments in the hangar. The mansion itself had been transformed almost as dramatically as its new inhabitants. What had once been a showcase of expensive minimalism, all sharp edges and cold surfaces designed to impress rather than comfort, now showed signs of actual habitation. Emma's colorful drawings adorned the previously pristine refrigerator. Her library books created cheerful piles on formerly spotless coffee tables, and her mechanical projects occupied corners of rooms that had never known the chaos of creativity. Maria emerged from the kitchen wearing a dress that cost more than she used to make in 6 months, her expression still carrying traces of disbelief at the luxury surrounding them. Robert had insisted on moving them in immediately, hiring private tutors for Emma and arranging for Maria to manage the household staff rather than clean, a promotion that came with a salary that made her weep with gratitude and guilt in equal measure. The transition had been hardest on her. Accepting charity had always gone against her fierce independence, but watching her daughter thrive in ways she never could have provided had ultimately convinced her to embrace this miraculous change. "Emma, me Joe, be careful on those floors. They're probably worth more than our old apartment building," Maria said softly, her voice still adjusting to the reality that this palatial home was now theirs. She moved through the space with careful precision, as if afraid that touching the wrong surface might reveal this entire experience to be an elaborate dream from which she would wake up back in their cramped studio apartment. "Actually, they're worth exactly $47,000 per square foot," Robert said, loosening his tie as he joined them in the foyer. The past 3 weeks had been a crash course in parenting that no business school could have prepared him for. "But Emma's happiness is worth considerably more than that." The words surprised him as they left his mouth. When had he started measuring value in terms of a child's joy rather than market prices? The adoption had changed more than just his legal status. It had fundamentally altered how he viewed everything in his carefully ordered world. Emma stopped spinning and ran to him, her small arms wrapping around his legs in a gesture that still made him freeze momentarily before remembering to hug her back. Physical affection was still foreign territory for Robert, a man who had conducted most of his adult relationships through handshakes and formal agreements. But Emma's patient persistence was slowly teaching him that love could be expressed through touch as well as provision, through presence as well as presence. The learning curve had been steep and occasionally humiliating. The first week had included disasters ranging from Emma's tears over breakfast cereal that was too fancy to taste good, to his panic when she developed a minor fever and he had summoned 3 different pediatricians for what turned out to be a completely normal childhood immune response. Maria had become his guide through the mysterious world of child-rearing, her gentle corrections and patient explanations helping him navigate everything from appropriate bedtime stories to the complex social dynamics of 8-year-old friendships. "Are you ready for tomorrow's school presentation?" Robert asked, kneeling down to meet her at eye level, a habit he had developed specifically for their conversations. Tomorrow would be the first real test of their new family dynamic, Emma's "bring your daddy to school day" that had started this entire journey. The event loomed in Robert's mind with the same anxiety he had once reserved for congressional hearings and hostile takeovers. Emma's expression became serious, the way it did when she was processing something important. "I'm excited, but also nervous. What if the other kids ask questions about why you adopted me? What if they think it's weird that we don't look the same, or that you're really rich and I used to be poor? What if they can tell that we're still figuring out how to be a family?" The vulnerability in her voice reminded Robert that beneath Emma's extraordinary intelligence and mechanical genius, she was still a 7-year-old girl navigating complex social dynamics with the added pressure of their unusual family story. Her fears weren't unfounded. The local media had covered the adoption extensively, and Robert's wealth made their family a subject of considerable speculation and gossip in their small community. "What questions are you worried about specifically?" Robert asked, his business training kicking in to help structure their conversation. He had learned that Emma responded well to logical problem-solving approaches, perhaps inherited from her late father's methodical mind. Breaking down problems into manageable components was something they both understood. "Jessica Morrison, that's Frank's daughter from the hangar. She told everyone at school that you only adopted me because I'm some kind of robot child who can fix anything. And Tommy Richardson said rich people only adopt kids for tax breaks and publicity. And Sarah Kim asked me if you're going to get tired of me when I can't fix something important and send me back like a broken toy." Emma's matter-of-fact delivery of these cruel childhood observations made Robert's protective instincts flare with unexpected intensity. The idea that other children would question Emma's worth or his commitment triggered a rage that surprised him with its ferocity. He wanted to march into that school and deliver some harsh lessons about respect and kindness, but he recognized that such an approach would only confirm the worst assumptions about wealthy, powerful men trying to control situations through intimidation. "And what do you think?" Robert asked carefully, fighting the urge to track down these children's parents and deliver some corporate-style consequences for their offspring's cruelty. Instead, he wanted to help Emma develop her own responses to such challenges, to build the kind of confidence that would serve her throughout life, rather than simply solving this immediate problem with his usual combination of money and influence. Emma tilted her head thoughtfully, a gesture that reminded him so much of her behavior in the hangar that first day. "I think you adopted me because we both needed something the other person had. You needed someone who could fix things and understand how machines work. And I needed someone who could teach me about business and take care of Mommy and me. But also," she paused, biting her lower lip in the way children do when they're about to say something they're not sure will be received well. "Go on," Robert encouraged, recognizing that whatever Emma was about to say would likely cut straight to the heart of their relationship with the same precision she brought to mechanical problems. "I think maybe you were lonely too, and you needed someone to love who would love you back. And maybe you're learning that being a daddy isn't about being perfect. It's about showing up and trying your best, even when you don't know what you're doing." Emma's insight was delivered with the startling clarity that had first captured Robert's attention, but now it carried the added weight of genuine affection and understanding. The accuracy of her assessment took Robert's breath away. In 3 weeks, this remarkable child had identified and articulated the emotional dynamics that he had been struggling to understand himself. She had seen through his fears about inadequacy and inexperience to recognize the fundamental truth that love was about commitment and effort rather than natural talent or prior experience. "You're absolutely right," Robert said, his voice thick with emotion. "I was lonely, and I didn't even realize how lonely until I met you. And you're also right that I'm still figuring out how to be a good daddy. But here's what I want you to know, Emma. Even if you never fixed another machine in your entire life, even if you decided tomorrow that you wanted to become a professional ballet dancer or a veterinarian or anything else, I would still want to be your daddy. You're not here because of what you can do for me. You're here because of who you are." Emma's face lit up with a radiant smile that transformed the entire foyer with its warmth. "That's exactly what I hoped you would say, Daddy Robert, because I've been worried too, worried that maybe I'm not smart enough or good enough to deserve all this." She gestured around the luxurious space that was still so new to both of them. "Emma Rodriguez Sterling," Robert said formally, using her full legal name for emphasis, "you deserve every good thing this world has to offer, not because of what you can do, but because of who you are. Don't ever let anyone tell you otherwise." The moment was interrupted by Maria calling from the kitchen. "Breakfast is ready." But as they walked toward the dining room together, Robert realized that Emma had just given him exactly what he needed for tomorrow's school presentation. Not a defensive strategy or a public relations approach, but simply the confidence that their family was real, imperfect, and worth defending. The next morning arrived with the kind of nervous energy that reminded Robert of major product launches, except this time the stakes felt infinitely more personal. Emma had been awake since 5 a.m., checking and rechecking her backpack, practicing her introduction in the mirror, and asking Robert increasingly detailed questions about his business empire that she planned to share with her classmates. "Remember, Daddy Robert, you have to act like a real daddy, not like a boss giving a presentation," Emma instructed as they pulled up to Jefferson Elementary School in Robert's most modest vehicle, a BMW that still cost more than most teachers' annual salaries, but was the closest thing to inconspicuous in his fleet. Real daddies smile more and use smaller words, and maybe let kids ask silly questions without getting impatient. Robert adjusted his deliberately casual outfit, khakis and a polo shirt that had required consultation with 3 different stylists to achieve the right balance of approachable yet successful. The irony wasn't lost on him that he, who had addressed the United Nations and testified before Congress, was more nervous about speaking to a classroom of 7-year-olds than he had ever been about any professional presentation. "What constitutes a silly question?" he asked, genuinely curious about the 7-year-old perspective on appropriate versus inappropriate inquiries. Emma had become his guide to childhood social dynamics, a world that operated by rules completely foreign to his corporate experience. Like when Billy Patterson asked my friend Sarah's dad if he ever fought dinosaurs because he looked really old, Emma giggled. Or when Melissa Santos asked her mom's boyfriend why his teeth were so yellow. Kids don't mean to be rude, they just wonder about things and forget that some questions might hurt people's feelings. The parking lot of Jefferson Elementary was a revelation in social stratification that Robert had never previously considered. Minivans with soccer stickers sat next to pickup trucks with work equipment, while luxury SUVs clustered near the school entrance like expensive barriers between economic classes. Emma's classmates were emerging from these vehicles with fathers whose appearances ranged from construction workers still wearing steel-toed boots to investment bankers checking their phones between steps. "There's Jessica Morrison," Emma pointed to a blonde girl, whose confident stride and expensive sneakers suggested she was accustomed to being the center of attention. "She's been bragging all week about how her daddy owns the biggest airplane repair shop in the state and how he's going to bring actual airplane parts for everyone to see." Robert felt an unexpected surge of competitiveness, not the familiar corporate rivalry he knew how to navigate, but something more primal and protective. The idea that Emma might feel overshadowed or inferior because of other children's presentations triggered instincts he didn't know he possessed. This wasn't about market share or profit margins. This was about his daughter's happiness and social standing. territory that felt both more important and more treacherous than any business battlefield. "And that's Tommy Richardson," Emma continued, nodding toward a boy whose father wore a police uniform and carried himself with the quiet authority that came from years of dealing with difficult situations. "Tommy's really smart, but he can be mean sometimes. He's the one who said the thing about tax breaks and publicity stunts." Robert studied the boy with the analytical eye he usually reserved for potential business adversaries. Tommy Richardson was clearly intelligent, articulate for his age, and possessed the kind of aggressive confidence that could either become leadership ability or simple bullying depending on how it was channeled. His father's profession suggested a family culture that valued directness and skepticism about people's motives, qualities that could be admirable or destructive depending on the context. "How would you like me to handle it if Tommy or Jessica say something unkind during my presentation?" Robert asked, realizing that his usual approach of crushing opposition with superior resources and strategic maneuvering probably wasn't appropriate for elementary school social dynamics. The rules here were different, more complex in some ways, requiring a finesse he had never needed to develop. Emma considered this seriously as they walked toward the school entrance, her small hand tucked securely in his much larger one. Maybe just show them that being smart and successful doesn't mean you have to be mean to people who are different, and maybe help them understand that families come in all different shapes and sizes, but what makes them real is love, not just blood or money or looking the same. The wisdom in her words stopped Robert in his tracks. Here was a 7-year-old girl who had experienced poverty, loss and social stigma, yet had emerged with an understanding of love and acceptance that surpassed anything he had learned in his 45 years of life. She wasn't asking him to defend their unconventional family or prove their legitimacy. She was asking him to model the kind of grace and confidence that would speak for itself. "You know what, Emma?" Robert said, squeezing her hand gently as they approached the classroom where other father-daughter pairs were gathering. "I think you're going to teach these kids and their fathers just as much as they're going to learn from any presentation. Maybe more." Emma beamed up at him with the radiant smile that had become his favorite sight in the world. "That's what real daddies say, Daddy Robert. They believe their kids can do amazing things even when the kids aren't sure themselves." The classroom buzzed with controlled chaos as 23 second graders attempted to contain their excitement while their fathers set up various presentations around the room. Robert surveyed the competition with the same analytical eye he brought to market research. Frank Morrison was indeed unpacking authentic aircraft components that gleamed under the fluorescent lights. The police officer had brought handcuffs and a radio that crackled with official dispatcher chatter. And a doctor in scrubs was setting up a stethoscope demonstration that already had children lined up to listen to their own heartbeats. "Mr. Sterling, we're so honored to have you here today," gushed Mrs. Patterson, Emma's teacher, whose nervous energy suggested she was well aware of exactly how much money and influence had just walked into her classroom. "Emma has told us so much about your business empire and how you're teaching her about technology and innovation." Robert smiled politely while mentally noting that Emma had been more strategic in her sharing than he had realized. She had positioned their relationship as educational and mutually beneficial rather than focusing on the more emotional aspects of their adoption story. Smart girl, she understood instinctively that leading with competence and value would be more effective than appealing to sympathy. "Actually, Mrs. Patterson, I think Emma has been teaching me more than I've been teaching her," Robert replied, causing Emma to glow with pride and several nearby fathers to look up with curiosity. "She has insights into problem solving that have genuinely improved some of our business operations." This wasn't corporate politeness. It was absolute truth. In the 3 weeks since the adoption, Emma had identified inefficiencies in his office building's climate control system, suggested improvements to the employee breakroom layout that had increased productivity by 12%, and spotted a critical error in a software interface that his team of designers had missed completely. Her fresh perspective, unencumbered by assumptions about how things should work, had proven invaluable in ways he was still discovering. "Emma, would you like to introduce your daddy to the class?" Mrs. Patterson asked, and Emma practically vibrated with excitement as she stood up in front of her classmates. Robert felt his heart rate spike as he watched his daughter command the attention of the room with natural confidence that reminded him powerfully of himself during his most successful presentations. "This is my daddy, Robert Sterling," Emma began, her voice clear and confident despite the magnitude of the moment. "He adopted me 3 weeks ago because we needed each other. He needed someone who could fix things that were broken, and I needed someone who could take care of me and Mommy and teach me how to be successful when I grow up." The simplicity of her introduction was perfect. No defensive explanations, no elaborate justifications, just the straightforward truth delivered with the confidence of someone who knew exactly where she belonged. Robert felt a surge of pride so intense it was almost painful, watching this remarkable child present their unconventional family with dignity and clarity. "My daddy owns Sterling Industries, which makes computer stuff that helps other companies work better. But the coolest thing about him isn't how much money he has. It's that he listens when I have ideas and he treats me like my thoughts matter, even though I'm just 7. Robert felt his throat tighten with emotion. Emma was describing exactly what he had never experienced as a child, being heard, valued, taken seriously despite his age. Without realizing it, he had given her something precious that his own parents had never offered him, the sense that her intelligence and insights were genuinely valuable, rather than merely cute or precocious. "Today, my daddy is going to show you how technology can solve problems, but also how the best solutions usually come from understanding what people really need, not just what's fancy or expensive." Emma gestured toward Robert with obvious pride, and he realized she had essentially delivered the perfect introduction for the presentation he had planned. As Robert stepped forward, he noticed Tommy Richardson whispering something to Jessica Morrison, both children wearing expressions of skeptical curiosity. Their body language suggested they were preparing challenges, testing whether this billionaire daddy was as genuine as his daughter claimed, or just another adult putting on a show. "Emma is absolutely right," Robert began, his voice taking on the warm, conversational tone he'd been practicing for weeks. "The most important thing I've learned in business is that the smartest solutions often come from the most unexpected places. In fact, Emma solved a $100 million problem for me in about 60 seconds, which is better than my entire engineering team had done in 3 hours." He had their attention now. 23 children and their fathers were staring at him with genuine interest, rather than polite obligation. Even the most skeptical faces showed curiosity about this claim that seemed too extraordinary to be true. "Who here has ever had something break that the adults couldn't fix?" Robert asked, and nearly every hand in the room shot up, including some of the fathers who grinned sheepishly at the admission. The universal nature of the experience created an immediate connection between Robert and his audience, establishing common ground that transcended economic differences. "Emma, would you tell everyone about the airplane?" Robert asked, and Emma stepped forward with the confidence of someone who had already lived through her moment of triumph and knew exactly how impressive the story was. "Well, Daddy Robert's really expensive airplane stopped working, and all the smart airplane doctors couldn't figure out what was wrong. But I remembered what my first daddy taught me about how machines talk to each other, and I saw that one of the wires was trying to talk to the wrong friend." Emma's explanation was perfectly pitched for her audience, technical enough to be impressive, simple enough to be understood by 7-year-olds. The grown-ups had been looking at the complicated parts, but sometimes the answer is in the simple parts that everyone thinks are too easy to be the problem. Emma continued, warming to her subject with the natural storytelling ability that made complex concepts accessible. It's like when your video game stops working and your parents check everything except the part where the controller batteries are dead. The children laughed in recognition, and Robert noticed several fathers nodding with rueful appreciation. Emma had just delivered a masterclass in communication, making complex concepts accessible without being condescending, connecting with her audience through shared experience rather than superior knowledge. That's exactly the kind of thinking that makes great entrepreneurs, Robert said, picking up the thread seamlessly. The best business solutions come from seeing what everyone else misses, and children often see things more clearly than adults because they haven't learned to ignore the obvious yet. He pulled out his phone and projected images onto the portable screen he had brought, showing diagrams and photographs that illustrated Emma's contribution to his business operations. Emma's observation about the airplane wire led us to develop a new diagnostic system that looks for simple problems first before checking complex ones. This system is now being used by aircraft maintenance teams around the world, and it all started with a 7-year-old girl who wasn't afraid to speak up when adults were struggling. The room had fallen completely silent, not the restless quiet of children being forced to pay attention, but the engaged stillness of an audience genuinely absorbed in what they were hearing. Robert could see the shift in their expressions as they began to understand that this wasn't just a feel-good story about adoption, but a legitimate example of a child making meaningful contributions to adult problems. But here's the really cool part, Robert continued, clicking to the next slide, which showed photographs of Emma working alongside his engineering team. We're now working with elementary schools to teach children basic problem-solving skills that companies need. Because it turns out that second graders are excellent at identifying why things don't work the way they should. Tommy Richardson's hand shot up with the aggressive enthusiasm of a child who'd been waiting for his moment to challenge the adult narrative. My dad says rich people only adopt kids for money reasons. Why did you really adopt Emma? The question hung in the air like a challenge, and Robert felt every adult in the room tense with second-hand embarrassment. But Emma had prepared him for this moment, and her advice echoed in his mind. Show them that success doesn't require meanness, that strength can be demonstrated through grace rather than dominance. That's a really good question, Tommy, Robert said calmly, making direct eye contact with the boy and acknowledging the legitimacy of his skepticism. There are a lot of tax benefits to having children, but honestly, raising Emma is going to cost me way more money than I'll ever save. Private school, college, medical bills, food, clothes, toys, family vacations, probably several $1,000,000 by the time she's grown up. Tommy looked slightly deflated that his provocative question had been answered so straightforwardly, without defensiveness or evasion. Robert could see the boy recalculating his approach, trying to decide whether to press his attack or accept that his challenge had been met with honest transparency. So, why did I do it? Robert continued, his voice carrying the kind of quiet conviction that made even the most skeptical listeners pay attention. Because Emma offered me something I couldn't buy with all my money, the chance to be part of a real family. I had spent 45 years being successful but lonely, and Emma showed me that the smartest business decision I could make was investing in love. The answer was met with absolute silence, as both children and adults processed this unexpectedly vulnerable admission from one of the most powerful men in the state. Robert worried for a moment that he had been too honest, too emotional for this audience of practical families who might view such sentimentality as weakness or manipulation. Then Tommy's father, Officer Richardson, started clapping slowly, his weathered hands creating a steady rhythm that was soon joined by the rest of the room. The applause wasn't polite or obligatory. It carried the weight of genuine appreciation for honesty that transcended economic and social boundaries. That, said Frank Morrison loudly, his voice carrying over the applause, is the best explanation of adoption I've ever heard. And I've heard a lot of them, working with families in crisis. Jessica Morrison, who had been preparing to launch her own challenge, instead raised her hand with uncharacteristic hesitancy. "Mr. Sterling, do you think Emma could teach me how to see the simple fixes that grown-ups miss? Because my daddy's always complaining about broken stuff at his shop, and maybe I could help him too." The question from Jessica opened floodgates that Robert hadn't anticipated. Suddenly, every child in the room wanted to know if Emma could help solve problems in their own families. Broken computers, cars that made weird noises, appliances that didn't work right, even interpersonal conflicts that seemed unsolvable to adult eyes. Emma fielded each question with the serious consideration of a consulting expert, offering suggestions that ranged from brilliant to adorably naive. "The thing is," Emma explained to her rapidly growing audience of admirers, "grown-ups sometimes forget to check if something is plugged in or if a switch got turned off by accident. They jump straight to the scary, expensive possibilities because they're worried about being responsible for big problems." Robert watched in amazement as his 7-year-old daughter essentially conducted a masterclass in troubleshooting methodology for an audience of children and their professional fathers. She was displaying the same analytical thinking that had made him billions, but with an accessibility and warmth that his corporate presentations had never achieved. "But how do you know so much about fixing things?" asked Sarah Kim, whose father worked as a software engineer and was taking notes on Emma's explanations with obvious professional interest. "Are you like a genius or something? My first daddy was really good at understanding how things work, and he taught me that everything, machines, people, families, they all work better when the connections are strong and clear," Emma replied, her voice carrying the slight wistfulness that always appeared when she mentioned her biological father. Robert felt a surge of emotion that caught him off guard. Emma never compared him unfavorably to her late father, but she also never forgot the foundation of knowledge and love that had shaped her first 7 years. Her ability to honor her past while embracing her present demonstrated an emotional maturity that humbled him daily, reminding him that healing didn't require forgetting, but rather integrating loss into a larger story of hope. "That's beautiful, Emma," said Dr. Sarah Kim's father, his professional demeanor softening with genuine appreciation. "It sounds like your first daddy gave you tools that you're now sharing with your new daddy and all of us." "That's exactly right," Robert said, his voice thick with pride and something deeper, a recognition that Emma had taught him how to honor, rather than compete with her biological father's memory. "Emma taught me that the best way to honor someone's memory is to use what they taught you to help other people." Her father's lessons about fixing things aren't just helping our family, they're helping my entire company work better. Mrs. Patterson stepped forward as the formal presentation time drew to a close, but her expression suggested that what had just happened transcended the typical bring-your-parent-to-school format. "Mr. Sterling, this has been absolutely fascinating, but I think what's most impressive is watching Emma's confidence and the way you two communicate with each other. It's clear that adoption has been wonderful for both of you." "Actually," Robert said, an idea suddenly crystallizing in his mind with the clarity that accompanied his best business inspirations, "I'd like to propose something to the class. Emma and I have been talking about starting a summer program where kids can learn basic problem-solving skills while helping solve real challenges at my company. It would be part science camp, part business internship, designed specifically for elementary school students." The excitement in the room was immediate and electric. Children began chattering with their fathers about circuits and computers and the possibility of working in a real office building. Even Tommy Richardson was asking detailed questions about whether the program would include police-style investigative techniques. His earlier skepticism transformed into genuine enthusiasm. "The program would be free," Robert continued, watching as several parents who had been maintaining polite but distant expressions suddenly leaned forward with real interest. "And we'd provide all the materials and transportation, because Emma's right. Kids see solutions that adults miss, and we want to encourage that kind of thinking before school teaches you to stop questioning obvious answers. Emma was practically glowing with excitement, but she raised her hand with uncharacteristic formality. "Daddy Robert, can I be the assistant teacher, since I already know how to explain grown-up things in kid language?" "I think," Robert said, kneeling down to her level in front of the entire class, "that you should be the co-director. Partners make the best decisions together." The hug that followed was spontaneous and fierce, witnessed by 23 children and their fathers who were seeing something remarkable, a business titan and a brilliant little girl who had found in each other exactly what they needed to become complete. 6 months later, Robert Sterling stood in the renovated wing of his headquarters building, watching 25 children from Jefferson Elementary work in teams to solve real engineering challenges submitted by his company's clients. The Sterling Youth Innovation Center had exceeded every expectation, generating not only practical solutions worth millions of dollars, but also a waiting list of other schools desperate to participate in similar programs. More importantly, it had become a symbol of what was possible when different worlds chose to learn from each other rather than maintain their separate boundaries. Emma moved between the workstations like a miniature executive, offering encouragement here, technical guidance there, mediating disputes with the diplomatic skills of someone far beyond her 8 years. She wore a lab coat with co-director embroidered on the pocket, a birthday gift that had made her cry with joy when she realized it meant her role was official and permanent. Daddy Robert, Team 3 figured out how to make the solar panel cleaning robot work with less water, and Team 5 thinks they know why the factory conveyor belt keeps jamming, Emma reported, consulting the tablet where she tracked each team's progress with meticulous attention to detail that would have impressed any Fortune 500 executive. "That's fantastic," Robert replied, but his attention was caught by something else entirely. Maria Rodriguez stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows, tears streaming down her face as she watched her daughter commanding respect and admiration from children and adults alike. Over the past months, Maria had transformed as dramatically as Emma and Robert, no longer just managing household staff, but becoming the program's operational coordinator, her natural warmth and organizational skills making her indispensable to its success. More importantly, she had become the emotional anchor that held their unconventional family together when the pressures of blending their dramatically different worlds became overwhelming. "Maria, are you all right?" Robert asked softly, joining her at the window where the afternoon sunlight created patterns on the polished floor. "I keep thinking about Carlos," Maria whispered, referring to Emma's biological father with the kind of reverence that spoke to love that transcended death. He would be so proud to see her like this, confident, brilliant, surrounded by people who respect her mind and value her ideas. This is everything he dreamed for her, but never thought would be possible given our circumstances. Robert felt the familiar tightness in his chest that came whenever he contemplated the responsibility he had taken on. Not just the legal obligation to provide for Emma and Maria, but the deeper commitment to honor the foundation that Carlos Rodriguez had built in his daughter's first 7 years, to ensure that his sacrifice and love continued to bear fruit through the opportunities Robert could provide. "I think he knew," Robert said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of 6 months of daily discoveries about the man whose daughter he was now raising. "Emma carries his lessons with her every day. The way she approaches problems, the way she treats people with kindness while expecting excellence, the way she sees solutions where others see obstacles that came from him. I'm just the vehicle helping her reach destinations he pointed her toward." "No," Maria said firmly, turning to face him with an intensity that reminded him powerfully of her daughter. "You're not just a vehicle, Roberto. You're the father she needed when she was ready to grow beyond what Carlos and I could give her alone. He taught her to fix things, but you're teaching her to build things. There's a difference." Before Robert could respond, Emma's voice rang out across the Innovation Center with the kind of excitement that made every adult in the room stop what they were doing. "Everyone, come look at this!" Tommy and Jessica figured out how to make the inventory tracking system work with voice commands instead of scanning codes. It's going to help people who can't read well still be able to do important jobs. The solution was elegant, practical, and worth approximately $50 million in efficiency improvements across Robert's supply chain operations. But more than that, it represented exactly what Emma had promised him that first day in the hangar: her ability to fix things that were broken in his world, though neither of them had understood then how broadly that promise would apply. As Robert watched Tommy Richardson and Jessica Morrison explain their breakthrough to an audience of their peers, he realized that Emma had fixed something far more valuable than software or airplanes or corporate processes. She had fixed his understanding of what success actually meant, transformed his definition of family from biological accident to chosen commitment, and taught him that the most sophisticated technology in the world was worthless compared to the simple miracle of unconditional love. "Daddy Robert!" Emma called, gesturing for him to join the celebration with the kind of imperious command that only beloved children can issue to powerful adults. "Come see what we built together." The word "together" carried weight that no business contract could capture, encompassing not just this moment, but the entire journey from that first day in the hangar to this culmination of everything they had learned about fixing broken things. Robert Sterling, who had spent 45 years believing that worth was measured in market capitalization and quarterly returns, had discovered through a 7-year-old girl that the most valuable things in life couldn't be bought, only built through patience, love, and the courage to let other people help fix your broken places. As he walked toward Emma and their students, Robert understood that this was what redemption looked like. Not a dramatic single moment of transformation, but the daily choice to believe that broken things could be made whole again, that lonely people could become family, and that the smartest investment anyone could make was in the radical possibility of love. Emma's brilliant smile welcomed him into the circle of children, celebrating their achievement, and Robert Sterling finally understood that he hadn't just adopted a daughter, he had been adopted into a life worth living.